Good morning. I'm Dr. Joseph Lamb. It's great to be with you this morning. It's a sunny day here in Gig Harbor, and we're talking about gut health. This is the second in our series on gut health. Next week, we'll be talking about metabolic transformation and gut restoration. The week after, we'll be talking about mindful eating. And the week after, we'll be talking about self-care and stress management. At 11 o'clock this morning, we're going to be touching upon nutrition for cardiovascular health, the second part of that discussion. So I hope you'll join us. And then at 4 p.m. today, also Pacific Daylight Time, Michael Stone and I will be having our Monday afternoon lunch and learn. So thanks for being here. Hope you had a great weekend. So good gut health. You know, most of us think about our guts as that transit tube that runs from our mouth down towards our anus. And it's almost like a donut, right? You know, it's the hole in the center of the donut is not really the donut, but it's kind of integral to the donut. And our gut is the same sort of connection. It runs from our mouth downwards, and it's a different environment than the rest of us. And we talked in detail last time about the microbiome. We talked about, you know, that there are more bacteria in our colons than there are stars in the known universe. We talked about the fact that when you look at all of our microbiomes, they represent, you know, a huge community with which we live, and that they have great influences on our health. So when it comes to what we put in our mouth, nutrition becomes crucially important. And, you know, from the nutritional point of view, we want to do things that make a difference. First and foremost, we need to be thinking about the fact that there's probably no traditional medication, and similarly, no nutritional supplement or botanical supplement that in and of itself can overcome a bad diet. You know, if you're eating 8 Twinkies a day on the Twinkies are us diet, well, no matter what you do, you are going to be challenged no matter which supplements you take. We're not yet at a point where we can make up for all of that white flour and make up for all of that sugar that you may indeed ingest. So it becomes one of, if we want good gut health, it really becomes one of saying, okay, what do we need to do? And so what are the components of a healthy diet? Well, components of food that we can describe the macronutrient content, and we can describe the micronutrient content, and then we can talk about things like the information content, like phytonutrients, and then we can talk about the component, particularly when it comes to gut health, talking about the component of you know, the kind of a macronutrient component that we don't normally think about, which is the fiber constituent. So let's run through these and let's talk about what we need to do to get good gut health. So the reason why it's so important is that it has been demonstrated that imbalances in what we ingest can actually lead to gut health issues. You know, it is fairly clear, for example, that taking something corrosive is going to lead to damage. You know, kind of the most extreme example, if someone does something by mistake, swallowing bleach or something of that sort, or swallowing acid in some sort of ill-fated mistake, or even an attempt to hurt themselves, there is direct caustic damage to the lining of the esophagus and the stomach, and the consequences can be severe and even fatal. And not counting the metabolic consequences of trying to deal with what we've ingested. But we also know that things have direct toxic effects, like the nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. If we take too much ibuprofen, for example, it can cause ulcers, not just because of its direct erosive effect, but also because it inhibits the prostaglandins that protect the gut lining. We know that certain bacteria predispose, Helicobacter pylori, which has been identified as playing a role in the onset of ulcers. And, there's now some thought that, some Helicobacter may be okay. It's the overgrowth which leads to the development of ulcers. So when you see Helicobacter, the solution may not just be, acid reduction and triple antibiotic therapy, but instead it may be restoration of a good microbiome balance. So, we have things that have direct toxic effects, but things that we consider normal parts of our diet, or relatively normal parts of our diet, and we don't think about direct effects, can be problematic as well. While nonsteroidals are classically identified as causing gastritis or ulcer disease, they can also cause erosions and leakiness of the small bowel and of the colon. Alcohol, which we think about more as a liver toxic drug, a hepatotoxic drug, or I should say substance, because many of us don't think of alcohol as a drug, but or not even as a drug of abuse. But while it has direct liver toxic effects, it also has the ability to cause gastritis and ulcerations in the stomach. But it goes further. It can cause, at lesser doses, it can cause less appreciated physical changes, like the development of a leaky gut, that kind of hyperpermeability of the gut lining, so that things that should stay on the gut side of the intestinal barrier end up on the body side of the barrier. And if they're incomplete proteins, then that can lead to an immune response, or incompletely digested proteins, it can lead to an immune response, so that, peptide chains are getting across that are immunogenic, that create a response, as opposed to individual amino acids. It can allow things like breakdown products of yeast or bacteria to get across. Lipopolysaccharide is the classic one in that regard. It's also called endotoxin. And when endotoxin leaks across, it leads to an immune response in the lining of blood vessels, and can actually lead to spasm of the blood vessels and less response in terms of dilation of the blood vessels. So, alcohol indeed is used in animal models for leaky gut, because giving a rat alcohol is a good way to produce a leaky gut. Similarly, other things that have direct effects are both sugars and fats. It's been demonstrated, for example, that a meal consisting of a double pattied burger, coupled with fries and coupled with a large sugared soft drink, led to a change in endothelial function, probably because it led to a change in gut permeability, and that change in gut permeability led to rising endotoxin levels, and that was coupled with rising sugar levels and rising insulin levels and inhibition of AKT, one of the kinases that provides signaling to PKC beta 2 in the lining of the blood vessels, the endothelium of the blood vessels. And as a consequence, less responsiveness, more spasm, not the ability to increase flow with demand. So the sluggishness we feel after a fatty meal, after a highly sugared meal, after an alcohol meal, may not just be from having a full gut, may not just be from having blood pulled to the gut for digestion purposes, but it may also be because we can't open the blood vessels as easily to the periphery of our body, to our muscles to do work, or to our brains to do more cognitive and emotional type, behavioral type work. And so, when we look at this, it becomes really relevant because, good gut health is being thrown off. And, for most of us, we measure our gut health. We think about it in terms of, do we have reflux or do we have dyspepsia, so indigestion after a meal? Are we bloated? Are we burping? Are we passing gas? What are our bowel habits like? Are they normal? Are we constipated? Are we having diarrhea? Is there mucus in our stools? Is there pus in our stools? Is there blood in our stools? And, all of these consequences are things that are really readily apparent. But the kind of insidious piece is the changes that are taking place from a gut with increased permeability, endothelial dysfunction, the first step towards the development of atherosclerosis and heart disease, the kind of inflammatory response that could lead to molecular mimicry. So, when we're eating diets, we want to make sure that the macronutrient content is right. A lot of attention has been given to the ketogenic diets in recent years. And one of the things that we have to be very careful about when thinking about the ketogenic diets is the fact that they are good short-term engagement, kind of like a body hack to help us move into a fat-burning mode, but they're not necessarily a good long-term program. Because, if you think about someone who has maybe achieved their target weight, is doing a lot of exercise, and let's say has a kind of a energy requirement of, just to make our math easy, 2,000 calories a day, let's say, because they're exercising a good bit, they're a fit athlete, and they want to eat the ketogenic diet because they want to keep burning fat. Well, at 2,000 calories a day, if 70% of your calories are coming from fat, or that would be, 0.7 times 2,000, that would be 1,400 calories coming from fat. And if 1,400 calories are coming from fat, and you divide that by 9, you're going to end up with greater than 150 grams of fat for your daily intake. And whether that's medium chain triglycerides, whether that's polyunsaturated fats, whether that's monounsaturated fats, or whether it's saturated fat, it's well over 100 grams a day. And a study by Pennyala and at Pennebaker, connected to LSU, they demonstrated that a fat intake of over 100 grams a day was part of an unhealthy diet, which led to an increase in the permeability of the gut to endotoxin. Similarly, when we're eating a high glycemic load food plan, kind of the opposite of eating 70% fat, when we're eating a high glycemic load food plan, lots of carbohydrates, lots of simple carbohydrates, we have the same sort of clinical picture, the elevation of gut permeability and the development of changes in the body that we may not be recognizing. Yes, we may recognize that our waist is getting a little bit bigger. Yes, we may recognize that we've lost some muscle mass, but we may not be recognizing the deeper consequences of that. So, at a macro level, eating the right amount of fat, eating the right amount of carbohydrates, getting adequate protein so that we maintain good gut health becomes important. And, a big component of looking at gut health is looking specifically at the fiber content of what we eat. Fiber can be two forms. It can be soluble fiber and it can be insoluble fiber. It can be, basically fiber is a component of what we eat that we aren't capable of breaking down on our own. If we eat a block of wood, we're not going to be able to break that cellulose down and use it effectively. It was interesting when I was in medical school, when I was in college, I did some research looking at what was called wood roaches, and they were like cockroaches that lived in trees and fallen trees and helped to eat the fallen trees. And they were able to break down the cellulose because of the microbiome that was within their guts. And we went on a mission right before Christmas break up to the mountains to collect a big segment of a log. We put them in tubs. We brought them back. They seemed happy. We went away on Christmas break. We kept the tubs closed. We thought everything would be good. We had the environment set up, and we came back and we found that the wood roaches had died. And one of the reasons we eventually hypothesized for the death of the wood roaches was that even though we had controlled for temperature and we had controlled for humidity and we controlled for light, what we hadn't controlled for was the change in elevation and the change in partial pressure of oxygen, and the fact that probably in the gut environment, there was a change in the amount of oxygen, in the anaerobic bacteria in the gut saw higher oxygen levels, and that was threatening to them and actually led to the demise of the microbiome. And it was the microbiome that allowed the wood roach to break down cellulose and use it for energy, so they could no longer successfully eat wood, and they died as a consequence. Well, our bacteria in our gut allow us to break down certain fibers, and and when we do so, and we break down those fibers, we get kind of they help us. For example, our symbiotic bacteria will take certain fibers and break them down into short chain fatty acids like butyrate, which our colon lining cells can then use as a source of energy. So having that right balance between the amount of fiber that's digestible by bacteria, having enough, and that sort of fiber is called a prebiotic fiber, having enough of the probiotics, the right bacteria that are present, that plays a really important role. The recommendations are that the average American should get about 25 grams of fiber a day, and most of us are in the 10 to 15 gram range. So getting natural fibers, eating lots of fruits and vegetables, eating whole grains. One of the things that happens, like when we go from whole grain to white flour as opposed to whole wheat flour, is we've stripped out the kernel. And when we do that, we've lost some of the fiber, but we've also lost the healthy omega-3 fatty acids, and we end up with white flour, And why did we do that? Well, we did that. We took out the kernel because those omega-3 fatty acids were present, would go rancid quite quickly in an open environment. And, if we go back to the 1800s, early 1900s, flour wasn't necessarily shipped in these big containers that were metal and enclosed, like on a railroad car or a tanker car, and the flour pumped through. Instead, flour was put into big sacks and canvas sacks and stored on the back of railroad cars. And if it got wet, it got wet. And if it got bugs in it, it got bugs in it. If it got bird dew on it, it got bird dew on it. Hence the kind of sifting that we used to do of our flour to take out particulate matter that we didn't want in our flour, or clumped flour. So it became really important to modify our food in order to keep it clean and sanitary for us, but we lost important pieces along the way. So when we eat white bread, so when we don't get enough fruits and vegetables, we're not getting enough fiber to support us and to support the healthy bacteria. And fiber also works in a kind of adaptogenic way, that non-digestible fiber works to help with that fluid balance. If there's too much fluid in the gut because there's leakiness or inflammation, fiber kind of lends a consistency and structure to the stool and may even absorb some of that water and allow for a firmer stool. And similarly, on the flip side, if we're sort of constipated and there's a good amount of fiber in our diet, then it will pull fluid into the bowels and help us be able to wash it out. So, those are the important macronutrient constituents. When you start talking about further components of gut health and what you can do, specifically, we can start talking about some of the botanicals that make a difference. One of the botanicals that's great for the gut is licorice, deglycyrrhizinated licorice. So licorice got a bad name because when people were eating a lot of licorice candy, people would end up with salt retention and would end up with high blood pressure because of the glycyrrhizin, the glycerinic acid that was present in licorice. And it raises cortisol levels and mineral corticoid levels with the resultant consequences. And as such, one of the things that becomes really sort of necessary is, it became necessary to limit how much true licorice was in candy, and the FDA did that. So, when we buy licorice candy made in the United States, for the most part, it's going to be made with anise and fennel instead of licorice. But licorice can be used medicinally for treating the adrenal glands. And in that case, you want it to be the entire extract of licorice. Or if you're trying to treat the gut and get gut healing, you can have what's called DG, or deglycyrrhizinated licorice, which has that component taken out, but it still maintains the part that helps with a healthy gut. So a chewable DG licorice before meals, after meals, may help with reflux, may help with the lining of the gut. Similarly, aloe can play a role. It's a fiber source as well as a healing source. All of the demulcents make a difference, like slippery elm, marshmallow. That's actually an herb, not just a candy. There's the plant, the marshmallow, MALLOW plant, has buds that look like that kind of what we made candies to look like, but they're demulcents. They create like a slipperiness. They create like a protective layer. They add to that layer throughout the gut, the mucosal layer, that kind of filmy layer that is the home to the microbiome, and the kind of biofilm layer that leads to that healthy gut. So Robert's formula was a classic formulation that was used for inflammatory bowel disease back in the day. Other components that are really important, glutamine, for example, very important for gut health healing, amino acid used particularly for small bowel issues and gut issues. Butyrate can be used. It can actually, one of the short chain fatty acids that's a breakdown product by the friendly bacteria of fiber forming short chain fatty acids. Butyrate one of those short-chain fatty acids, and you can actually give it in the form of an enema, for example, for people with inflammatory bowel disease. We've learned a lot. The right fibers make a difference, and we want to make sure that we're using the appropriate fibers, the easily accessible fibers. The prebiotics like Jerusalem artichoke or larch or plantain play a role. Similarly, like when it comes to fiber, it may be better to use apple and oat forms rather than the psyllium. Some people these days are having reactions to psyllium. And then finally, novel things like there are human milk oligosaccharides. So oligo means few. Kind of chains of sugars, various sugars in a row, and these human milk oligosaccharides, or called HMO, are present in the colostrum of early breast milk. And when babies are born, they're born with permeable guts so that they can absorb immunoglobulins from the milk. They take it in from the milk that they're breastfeeding, and then they absorb them into their own system. And as they continue to mature, these can leave a message. And 2-fucosal lactose is an example of one of these oligosaccharides that can make a big difference. It's a component of the Ultra GI Replenish, which is a medical food aimed at helping support the gut and supporting good health. So we've talked a little bit today about the nutrition for good gut health. Next week, we're going to talk about the nutrition supporting metabolic transformation and a gut restoration program. So I hope to see you then. We'll be back 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time next week. And we have an upcoming kind of exciting session this Saturday. Hope you'll join us. It's 90 minutes of authoring. It's a presentation by the Consilience Partnership, Michael Stone, Susan Buell, Courtney Suter, and Monique Klass, and myself. And we'll see you then. There's a special announcement on Saturday, so stay tuned. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.